The first time I saw myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. My eyes were wide, almost scared, and my face was a mix of confusion and resolve. It was a face I never thought I'd see. I had spent so long living for someone else that I forgot what it felt like to live for myself. I had been to Las Vegas with Elvis, and during one of his shows, he called me up to his suite. I remember thinking it was strange, because he rarely went there between shows. When I arrived, he was lying in bed waiting for me. He grabbed me, and it was different rough, unlike anything we'd ever shared before. He tried to explain, saying, "This is how a real man makes love to his woman," but it wasn't the gentle Elvis I loved. He was under the influence, and I could see that he was scared just like I was. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake, thinking about everything that had led me to this moment. I thought about the marriages I'd seen outside our circle, where women had just as much say as men. I realized that living the way I had been was unnatural and harmful. I loved Elvis deeply, but I knew I had to take control of my life. I couldn't give up the new insights I'd gained. There was a whole world out there, and I needed to find my place in it. The next morning, Elvis woke up and asked, "Where are you going?" I hesitated, my heart pounding. "I have to go back," I said. "I have things to do." I paused, trying to find the right words. "But first, I have to tell you something. This is probably the most difficult thing I'm ever going to have to say. I'm leaving." Elvis sat up, his face filled with confusion and pain. "What do you mean, leaving?" he asked, his voice cracking. I took a deep breath. "I mean our marriage. You've lost me to a life of my own. I'm finding myself for the first time." He looked up at me, his eyes searching mine. We hugged, tears streaming down our faces. "I have to go," I said, breaking away. "If I stay now, I'll never leave." I grabbed my suitcase and headed for the door. As I walked out, I heard Elvis call out, "Cilla, maybe another time, another place." I stopped, looking back. "Maybe so," I replied. "This just isn't the time." And I walked out the door, leaving behind the only life I had ever known. One of the guys once told Elvis he was starting to look like Liberace, hoping Elvis would take the hint and rely on his talent. But Elvis always said, "I just want to read positive reviews. I don't want to hear any negativity." As a kid, his mom, Gladys, protected him from criticism by only putting good things in his albums and scrapbooks. If he hadn't been so sheltered, maybe he would have had a better view of his career. At least he would have known what people were saying about him, and could have used it to get better. No matter what he did, his fans always cheered for him. They stuck with him through good and bad performances, and their love was the only real satisfaction he felt. They approved of everything he did. Maybe as long as he was getting their cheers, he thought he was doing fine. But Colonel Parker was right when he told Elvis he needed to get his act together, or his whole career would fall apart. His personal life wasn't helping. He was dating Ginger Alden, who was 20 years younger than him, and the age difference was a big problem. He'd say, "I'm tired of raising kids. I don't have the patience to do it all over again." There were a lot of conflicts. Ginger didn't like touring and one-night stands. She was close to her family and didn't want to leave them. Elvis tried bringing part of her family with them, but that just caused more problems. "She spends more time with her sister and mother than she does with me," he complained. When I asked if he could really live with just one woman, he said, "Yes, now more than ever. I know I've made some mistakes, but the biggest one was not realizing what I had until I lost it. I want my family back. I wondered if we could make it work." "Maybe it was just too early in life for us," I said. "Maybe one day there will be a time for us." "Yeah," Elvis laughed. "When I'm 70 and you're 60, we'll both be so old we'll look really silly, racing around in golf carts." In April 1977, Elvis got sick and had to cancel his tour. He went back to Graceland. Lisa and I were visiting Dodger. Elvis called me up to his room. He didn't look like himself. His face and body were swollen. He was wearing pajamas, which he seemed to prefer lately when he was at home. He showed me Chero's book of numbers, and said there was something he wanted me to read. He was still looking for answers, still trying to find his purpose in life. If he had found a cause to support, like a drug-free society or world peace, he might have had the role he was searching for. His generosity showed this part of his nature, his love for giving, even to people he didn't know. But he never found a cause strong enough to keep him from turning to drugs. That night he read to me, searching for answers, just like he had done for years. In the days that followed, I remember boarding the Lisa Marie with my parents, Michelle, Jerry Schilling, Joan Esposito, and a few close friends. I sat alone, feeling lost. Then I went to the back of the plane, to Elvis's bedroom. I lay there, unable to believe he was really gone. I remembered the jokes he used to make about dying. He'd say, "It'd really take something for me to leave this earth." But he wore a chain with both a cross and a Star of David, saying he wanted to be covered in all areas just in case. Elvis was afraid of flying, but he never showed it. He felt responsible for making everyone else feel secure. So he acted self-assured, not wanting to let us down. I thought back to a flight from Los Angeles. There was a lot of turbulence, and the plane was shaking badly. Everyone was scared except Elvis. When I looked at him, he was smiling and took my hand. "Don't worry," he said. "We're gonna make it." I felt safe with him. If he said something was going to happen, it would happen. The trip to Memphis seemed endless. By the time we arrived, I was numb. We were rushed into a waiting limousine to avoid the photographers. Then we drove to Graceland, where we were met by relatives and close friends, the same people who had been around us for so many years. Seeing them was devastating. Most of Elvis's close family, Vernon, Grandma, her daughters Delta and Nash, and others gathered in Grandma's room, while his friends and the guys who worked for him were in the den. Everyone else was just walking in and out of the rooms, silent and solemn, glancing around in disbelief. Lisa was outside on the lawn, riding around in the golf cart her dad had given her. At first, I was surprised she could play at a time like this, but when I talked to her, I realized the full impact of what happened hadn't hit her yet. She had seen the paramedics rushing Elvis away, and he was still at the hospital when I arrived, so she was confused. "Is it true?" she asked. "Is my daddy really gone?" I was at a loss for words. She was our child. It was hard enough for me to believe and face Elvis's death. I didn't know how to tell her she would never see her dad again. I nodded and took her into my arms. We hugged, and then she ran out and started riding around in her golf cart again. But now I was glad she could play. I knew it was her way of avoiding reality. The night seemed endless. We sat around the dining room table, and I learned about the events leading up to Elvis's death. Elvis had played racquetball with his cousin Billy Smith until 4 in the morning, while Billy's wife Joe and Elvis's girlfriend Ginger watched. Then they all went to bed, but Elvis stayed up to read. He called down to his Aunt Delta for some ice water and said he was having trouble sleeping. Elvis was still reading when Ginger woke up at 9 in the morning. She went back to sleep and woke up again at around 1 in the afternoon. When she awoke, Elvis was not in bed. She found him lying face down on the bathroom floor. Ginger called downstairs, and Al Strada and Joe Esposito came running up. They called the paramedics, and Joe gave Elvis mouth-to-mouth resuscitation until they arrived. The paramedics rushed Elvis to the hospital, and his personal doctor, Dr. Nick, arrived and rode in the ambulance, working on Elvis all the way to Baptist Memorial. The staff tried for another half an hour to revive him, but it was too late. He was pronounced dead on arrival from heart failure. Vernon requested an autopsy, and Elvis's body was taken to the Memphis funeral home to be prepared for viewing at Graceland the next day. As I listened to the events leading up to Elvis's last hours, I became more and more disturbed. There were so many questions. Elvis was rarely left alone for any length of time. Suddenly, I knew I needed to be alone. I went upstairs to Elvis's private suite, where we had spent so much of our life together. The rooms were more organized than I expected. Many of his personal belongings were gone, and his nightstand was bare of books. I went into his dressing room, and it felt like I could sense his presence. His unique scent filled the room. It was an eerie feeling. From the dining room window, I could see thousands of people on Elvis Presley Boulevard, waiting for the hearse to bring his body back to Graceland. His music filled the air as radio stations paid tribute to the king. Soon the casket was placed in the entrance hall and opened for viewing. I sat in Grandma's room most of that afternoon as thousands of mourners from all over the world passed by, paying their last respects. Many wept, some even fainted. Others lingered at the casket, refusing to believe it was him. He was truly loved, admired, and respected. I waited for the right moment for Lisa and me to say goodbye. It was late that evening, and Elvis had been moved to the living room where the funeral was to be held. It was quiet, everyone had left. Together, we stood over him, emotional. "You look so peaceful, Satnin, so rested. I know you'll find happiness and all the answers there." Then I joked, "Just don't cause any trouble at the pearly gates." Lisa took my hand, and we placed a sterling silver bracelet depicting a mother and child's clasped hands on his right wrist. "We'll miss you. I knew my life would never be the same." Colonel came to the funeral wearing his usual baseball hat, shirt, and slacks. He tried to hide his emotions. Elvis had been like his own son. The Colonel was considered a cold-hearted businessman, but he had stayed loyal to Elvis, even when his career began to slip. This day he asked Vernon to sign a contract extending his position as Elvis's manager. He acted quickly, fearing that with Elvis gone, Vernon would be too distraught to handle the many offers and proposals that would come. Vernon signed. At the service, Lisa and I sat with Vernon and his new fiancée Sandy Miller, Dodger, Delta, Patsy, my parents, Michelle, and the rest of the family. George Hamilton was there, and Anne Margaret attended with her husband Roger Smith. Anne expressed her sympathy so sincerely that I felt a genuine bond with her. J.D. and the Stamps Quartet sang Elvis's favorite gospel songs. Vernon had chosen the preacher, a man who hardly knew Elvis and spoke mostly of his generosity. Elvis would have laughed and told his dad, "Couldn't you have got a comedian or something?" Elvis wouldn't have wanted us to grieve. After the service, we drove to the cemetery. Lisa and I rode with Vernon and Sandy. It was a 3-mile drive, and both sides of the street were lined with mourners. At the cemetery, there were thousands more. The pallbearers Jerry Schilling, Joe Esposito, George Klein, Lamar Fike, Billy Smith, Charlie Hodge, Dr. Nick, and Gene Smith carried the casket to the marble mausoleum where Elvis was laid to rest. We held a short ceremony, and one by one we walked to the coffin, kissed or touched it, and said a few words of farewell. Shortly after, for security reasons, he was moved to Graceland in the meditation garden, his final resting place. Before Lisa and I returned to L.A., Vernon called me to his office. He was overwhelmed with grief. Did I know anything that would help him understand why his son had died? He never fully accepted it, and I believed his pain led to his own death, just as Grandma later never recovered from Vernon's death. When Lisa and I got home, I was torn, trying to decide what was best for her. Many conflicting stories were coming out in the national publications, and I knew these could have a lasting negative effect on her memory of her father. I decided to send her to summer camp. There she could be protected from radio, TV, and newspapers, and could be with her many friends, including Debbie and Cindy, Joe and Joni's children. By the time she returned, I had already made plans with Michelle for a long trip to Europe. Anything to get away from the constant reminders that filled the media. As I close this book, I hope the stories and adventures within have sparked your imagination and brought you joy. But our journey doesn't have to end here. If you'd like to keep the magic alive, consider joining our special group of readers. By subscribing to our newsletter, you'll receive exclusive recommendations for new titles, exciting giveaways, and special discounts that are just for subscribers. It's a great way to stay connected and find your next big adventure. So if you're ready to keep the story going, you can join us right here. Just sign up, and let's continue this journey together. Thanks for reading, and I can't wait to share more amazing stories with you.